I think it's very important that we recognize that in each of you are so many congregations, but also so many stories. And each of us is gonna feel tonight. Our job tonight is to feel, and then to take our feelings of what we know to be true in our personal lives, of what we know to be true in our own congregations. And as I've said for the past couple of years, for those who have been with us at this event is really a reckoning for us, all of us. It cannot only be a celebration. It has to be a moment where we pause and we recognize that in celebrating our achievements, which are many of the congregations in this room have far surpassed any hopes that we could have had for lifting up the issues around mental health and inclusion more generally. But also to recognize that there are people here tonight, and you represent people who feel pain regarding many of the issues we're going to talk about tonight. And so for that reason and many more, it is an incredible honor to be joined by people who, many of whom have lived their lives in the public spotlight, but tonight we are going to understand from them what it feels like to be people, because this is an issue that affects all of us. So it is very humbling to sit in the midst of this incredibly esteemed group, and I'm going to take a minute to read the bios, which are in and of themselves even more humbling. So thank you for being here, Mrs. Dukakis. Kitty Dukakis has spent a lifetime in the public eye. She has earned 2 master's degrees, an accomplishment, but the next I think is even more important. She has raised 3 children, which we know is quite the job. She has co-authored 2 books and has worked extensively on issues related to the Holocaust, the Armenian genocide, and contemporary human rights issues. And we just heard Jay remind us all that what we're talking about tonight and what we talk about around inclusion is indeed a human rights issue. You have wrestled with debilitating depression and alcoholism. And to be able to say that on a panel is unusual, because we often know behind closed doors that people may be experiencing things that we are not aware, but we really commend what you have done for all of us in speaking out about these issues. Tonight we're going to hear about Tonight we're going to hear how you have turned what you consider to be a challenge into an opportunity, if not just for yourself, but for all of us. Governor Dukakis. Governor Dukakis began his political career as an elected town meeting member in Brookline, and it sounds like maybe owes some credit to Jay for the elections that then came forward. From then, you went on to be the elected governor of Massachusetts for an unprecedented 3 terms, and personally, my absolute first dedication to the democratic process was watching my parents glued to the television during those elections, and it's a crystal memory in my mind. You won the Democratic nomination for the presidency of the United States in 1988. You are a distinguished professor of political science at Northeastern University and a visiting professor at the School of Public Policy at UCLA, a role that gets you out of Massachusetts and into sunny California, a genius on our hands, quite obviously. As if these distinguished panelists were not enough, we're also joined tonight by Dr. Cynthia Piltch. Dr. Cynthia Piltch is an adjunct instructor at the Boston University Center for Psychiatric Rehabilitation, where you teach wellness and photo voice courses. She also maintains a private clinical practice in Lexington. You also happen to be good friends with Kitty and Michael, and you understand from personal experience the effects of depression. And finally, Jamie Katz. Jamie Katz is the Senior Vice President and General Counsel for Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center in Boston. Before joining BIDMC, Mr. Katz was the first General Counsel for the Commonwealth Health Insurance Connector Authority, serving between 2006 and 2010. Your greatest achievement, if I can ad-lib, is that you're married to Cynthia, and you credit him.
And the father of Lee.
And the father of Lee, absolutely. And Cynthia does credit you with being an essential lifeline. So I just want to pause on that. That's very moving. An essential lifeline to her community during the time where you found it hardest to ask for help. So what we've discussed today already is that this is not going to be about public life, this is about private life, but actually what we are commending tonight is the intersection of those two, and how do we bring our true selves out, what has been historically in the shadow. And that divide between what we face, if it's not public life, it's even to your friends and your family, that happy face you put on, and what is actually happening behind closed doors. We want to break through that barrier, and we want to bring more of our full selves to you. So I want to thank all of you for being here, and I want to thank all of you for being here before we start. So the first thing I'd like to recognize, many of us may have been glued to 60 Minutes with Anderson Cooper this past weekend, and you may have seen Governor and Mrs. Dukakis do something that was incredibly courageous, and actually to have to say that it's courageous tells you how shadowed this issue has been. But I watched on 60 Minutes this past weekend when you allowed the cameras and Anderson Cooper to watch a filming of your ECT treatment. So I'd like to first of all tell you how moved I was by that, but more importantly, I think we should begin by asking you, what gave you the ability to open your life up in that way?
I think I was convinced that unless people saw firsthand what this treatment was like and how benign it really was, and it is for me after all these years. It is the one thing that has saved my life. I would not have been here without it. And it continues to help me. And that's a fairly important thing for me to say, but it was important to let people see what happened during the process of ECT treatment with my wonderful doctor, and he's our whole doctor. He's the doctor to so many of us, including my husband and my kids, who just adore him because they know how he has changed our lives in so many ways. So it was a fairly simple decision to make.
And what has led up in your life that made this a simple decision? So I've read a lot, and we've talked before about what it has felt like to have to announce yourself as someone who has a mental health issue. And one of the most impactful stories that you have shared is when you had to say to your father, "Dad, I'm an alcoholic." Can you tell us about what that feels like in those moments?
How many of you knew my father? Do I see anybody in this audience? I think a lot of you. Good number. My dad, when I talked to him about being an alcoholic, had a very simple answer. He said, "You couldn't be." And I said, "What do you mean I couldn't be?" And he said, "You're Jewish and you're a woman." And that was the end of it. And I took him to a meeting several weeks later, an open meeting, which he enjoyed thoroughly. And he got in the car and said, "Some of me wishes I was an alcoholic so I could go to meetings." And typical of Harry Ellis Dixon. That's just the way he would have reacted, or I would have hoped he would react. And I also had a brother-in-law who was a dental surgeon and who helped thousands of people. And he was instrumental in getting me moving.
That's amazing. So you've spoken about the importance of family, and actually to think about our own congregations. In the late 1990s, Jews as a community across the United States had to begin to think about domestic violence and the Jewish community, and to recognize that we are not immune from these issues. And it's one thing to intellectualize that and to say that we know that this is a problem for other people, but to actually have to sit down with your own father and for the response to be, "Well, you're a Jew and you're a woman, so that absolutely can't be," that's the kind of reaction that isn't malicious. It's just culturally ingrained, and it's a comforting factor to think that there's protections that will protect me from these diseases, and in fact, it impacts us all. Now, I think it would be naive of us to not recognize how challenging this can be at times for people. So Governor Dukakis, one of the things we really want to make sure we talk about tonight is that we so often think about mental health as an individual, personalized experience. But in fact, I think our panelists feel strongly that this is a family and a community issue. So can you go back to the beginning and tell us a little bit about what it was like for you as Kitty's spouse, as you watched Kitty try treatment after treatment and not have the kind of success that you've had with ECT, and what that feels like as the spouse?
Well, I'm the inveterate optimist in the family. And in fact, folks, you can't be in politics and be a pessimist.
Are you sure?
even in these trying times. I mean, if you don't believe that good people working together can make a difference, then you're in the wrong business. And you got to remember that when I first got into politics in Massachusetts, this was one of the three or four most corrupt states in the country. You know, our challenge was to, in fact, when I went out ringing doorbells, maybe one or two of yours in Brookline, people would say to me, well, you look honest, I'll vote for you. And I finally called my mother and I said, Mom, thanks for producing a kid that at least looks honest. But I have to admit that my optimism was sorely challenged in the course of this. You know, there was medication out there, there was therapy, it seemed to be helpful to a lot of people. And to begin to recognize over a period of time that neither one was making any difference in Kitty's situation. Now, every situation is different, folks. In Kitty's case, she would experience these recurring cycles of depression every, what, sweetie, 7, 8, 9 months, for no apparent reason. They just happened. And she would go into a terrible depression for 3 or 4 months. Sometimes she kind of fought her way through it. Sometimes she drank herself into unconsciousness. But she'd come out of it. And she'd kind of be herself again. And so my optimism would revive, and I'd say, well, maybe it's working. She must have taken every antidepressant known to man, one after another after another. The thing that was so baffling about it, at least in retrospect, was that nobody, and this is at a great hospital, ever suggested that she see Charlie Welch, the ECT specialist. After years and years and years of treatment and support and all of that kind of thing, not working. And it took 17 years, folks, before another doctor, the Mass General, said to us, you know, Kitty ought to see Charlie Welch. And we saw Dr. Welch, who's an extraordinary human being. He's now the co-director of the ECT program at McLean, which, by the way, I think is doing about 10,000 ECTs a year. With the exception of China, where ECT is used extensively, it's the most active ECT center around. And we saw Dr. Welch.
And it's the most active right here in our own community, and yet that is certainly news to me, and I'm sure I heard the wow here. And so it still does remain in the shadow, which is why it was so important.
And so we saw Dr. Welch, and Kitty said, okay, the next time it happens, we're coming in.
Wow.
And I had some speeches to make in Barcelona. And we decided to tack on 4 or 5 days and go to Paris. And I was having a great time in Paris. I thought Kitty was, but in point of fact, she was starting to go down. Went back to Boston, got worse and worse. In fact, folks, the night before Kitty's first treatment with ECT, she was so shaky, she didn't trust herself to come home and not drink, and said to Dr. Welch, would you just hospitalize me overnight? The following day happened to be June the 20th, our wedding anniversary. We'll have our 55th coming up in June. Normally, I would take her to Mass General, not at McLean, but she was in the hospital. I arrived at about 9 o'clock in the morning at the General, and I had my wife back.
Wow.
The first treatment ended the depression, just like that. Now, that's pretty unusual.
Very unusual.
That's pretty unusual. I don't think Cynthia
Yeah, so let's turn to both of you, because so much of what I think has been shared will resonate. So I'd actually like to start with Jamie, because what I just asked the governor was, what does it feel like to be a supporter in this situation? So I'd love to hear your own experience and how you sought help coping with your own emotions and also to help your wife.
Well, this is a disease that creates enormous pain and devastation. The 2 worst days of my life were dropping Cynthia off at a locked psychiatric facility, not being confident of what I would get, of what treatment she would get, and then having to advocate for her while she's in a locked facility. The second time with a 12-year-old daughter at home, trying to protect her. But what I would say to all of you is, and there are many of you out there who are suffering or have friends or family who are going through this. Some of you yourselves may have gone through it. You can't do this alone. You cannot do this alone. And it is ironic for me to be talking about a synagogue, because I am, in all honesty, not a frequent flyer of synagogue. My wife is very active, but the second time in particular we had settled into and she was very active in the temple. And the problem with this disease, unlike breaking your leg or having something organic, is people don't know how to talk about it. People are afraid. The families and the patients find it hard to talk about, and the friends and family don't know what to say, don't know how to bring hope and strength and help. But I knew when Cynthia went in the second time that there was somebody who could help. And I knew that there were 2 people, actually. One was the Rabbi Jaffe, who has perhaps hoped for more of me than he has had, and then the assistant rabbi. And both of them were able to go and do something that very few people were able to do, which is to go into the hospital while Cynthia was getting treatments and talk to her and bring reassurance and bring pleasure and bring comfort and bring hope. And be able also to be silent when she needed to be silent, and to be able to be in her presence without being disturbed by who she was and what she was able to do at that time. And so for me, helping her through the synagogue was a very powerful statement, and I suspect many of you, if you haven't been able to find other people who can help you, there should be help with your synagogues, with your clergy, wherever, because these folks know, they've listened to people in pain, and they've helped people in pain.
One of the things that really resonates, I think, is this idea of bringing community to people, both where they are physically, but also emotionally and spiritually. And that resonates beyond this issue. And there are plenty of people who are not frequent flyers in synagogues, and yet, when you are in a moment of need, you're looking for this sort of community. And Cynthia, I think that was the case for you. Do you want to tell us a little bit about
I want to
this?
say a couple of things actually before that. I want to say, first of all, how important it was for me to have seen somebody who had received ECT treatment 20 years before I needed it, and saw that person come back to life. And it's one of the many reasons I admire Kitty's decision to do this piece, because being able to see it really takes away the stigma of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which was the only vision I had before. And so having seen that enabled me, after 12 medications did not do the trick, to say, I want ECT. And when the docs in the hospital were saying, oh, you're so bright and you need your mind, and I'm saying, what good is my mind when I'm this depressed? And he happened to be a very effective lawyer and a big guy. And I said, you need to help me here, and he did. So the first time I had ECT, that's what led to it. 15 years later, I went back, and because there had been more education, I didn't have to advocate. They knew immediately that that was what they should have done. And the reason that I allowed, and I'm a very private person, though I come across as Mr. Extrovert, I'm a very private person, and I was really very ashamed. I saw it as a weakness, and though you could, in fact, You could drown in the gene pool I came from. I really did tend to see this as a character flaw, even though I didn't say that to other people, right? And so for me, the fact that I could reach out and say it's okay to call Howard Jaffe, and that he could come and see me. And when I asked him in the very straightforward way I do things, how many people have you come to visit? He said to me, not enough. And I said, I'm going to start a program. And he said, first get well. I said, we'll make that deal. And so that's...
We made that deal.
We made that deal. And 6 months later, I went and knocked on his door. And I'm ready. And I said, are you ready? He said, I'm not sure. And he made me make a promise that I would be patient if I did this. Because this would move at glacial speed. And I said, I'm an honest person. I'm not going to tell you that I'm going to become patient. I said, but I will tell you I'll work at it, and I'll do the work that has to be done. So for a year, I went and talked to people in our community to build a connection with them.
And I think it is impossible to be patient in these urgent moments when it's on all of us that society has not caught up to this issue, and it is devastating to watch the effects of what it means to live in the shadows for everybody. However, we also know that it is also impossible to just wish things that were different. And so that's why we're all here tonight, to really stop wishing. And we can use our prayers and we can use our communities, but we also need to use action. So,
Sarah, could I just say one other thing? I want to say that in that second hospitalization, I made a conscious choice that I was going to come out of the closet, because I always passed as being fine, just as Kitty and so many other people we know. We look fine, right? And so I was honored the first time when other patients said, oh, you must be the staff psychiatrist. Oh, good, that means I'm not so bad. The second time, I had the chutzpah, the good sense to say, I'm as sick as you are, I just don't look it. And so I knew that the only way I was going to have peace is if I became public.
it's amazing, and I think we need more of that, but we also have to recognize at the beginning, I spoke a little bit about the importance of really being honest in our reflection around this issue, and not everyone is going to be able to come out of the closet in that way because they don't necessarily have the support. And many of you have done incredible work on inclusion in your congregations, but the issue of mental health has remained separate. And so it is time for us to think as strategically about the less visible, all sorts of different less visible disabilities, including mental health. So I wanted to ask you, Mrs. Dukakis, you have recently joined a synagogue that is near and dear to many of us, Kehillat Israel in Brookline. And so from your perspective, coming all the way kind of full circle from a father who said to you, well, you're fine, you're Jewish and you're a woman, you're good, to a congregation, what are your hopes for synagogues and community in this fight?
I think, first of all, the rabbi at Michigan Tefillah.
No, it's
KI, excuse me. When you're 81 years old, you forget, and you'll
Not very much.
I knew the rabbi at the synagogue, and he had been very forceful in so many positive ways. And you can talk about the baby stuff.
No, I have I don't know why, but I give speeches and people, and women who are very pregnant deliver shortly after the speech.
Anybody need help?
Warning you. I think we have a number of doctors here
And one of the fun stories between us and the Hamiltons is that I think Debbie was overdue maybe a week. And I said, I don't know what it is, but you may go into labor very soon after the speech is over. And she did.
Fair warning. Actually, it's a little late for everybody.
And none of us have ever forgot that. But, I'm a good Greek Orthodox. And we've got a very ecumenical household, but I'm a big fan of Rabbi Hamilton.
And what has it meant for you to see, and to see this room tonight, to see the idea of community and not this being just a private issue, but bringing it into community?
I can't emphasize enough, folks, the importance, A, of your being here, and B, participating actively in what should be a community effort. And one of the things, it's very interesting, one of the things that I've experienced, I can't speak for you guys, but maybe, is a comfort factor I have in talking to folks who are having mental health problems, which I never had before having this experience. Just today, folks, I teach, as many of you know, in Northeastern, and I'm teaching a public policy course in this short 7-week spring semester. And one of my students came in to see me who had seen 60 Minutes. She's a young woman from New Hampshire, very attractive, bright, and she said, please tell your wife that I really admired what she did. I said, she's going to be in a class one of these days. You'll have a chance to meet her, because Kitty always does the health policy class. And then she said to me, you know, I went through 2 brutal years of depression. I was hospitalized at McLean and so on and so forth. And thanks to the work that was done at McLean, not in this case ECT, but some other approach to this, she's in wonderful shape. But it's such a good feeling to be able to have that conversation with one of my students, and I spent a lot of time with my students, and not only personally feel comfortable, but be, I guess, comfortable enough so that one's students or the people that you're talking with feel a confidence in sharing with you, as she did.
Absolutely.
And it's a great story of recovery.
Absolutely.
And I had such a great feeling after having that conversation.
And I think it's the feeling that we all look for, especially when it has been hard in the past to find shared common ground or to even know how to express these things. As soon as you're able to do that, you find out that the person sitting next to you has a story as well. But we can't do that if we don't share, and we also can't just do that just to share it. Again, it has to be based on action. To go back to what the Rudermans have always told us, this is not just because we're good people, this is not just because it's the right thing to do, and in our case, because it's deeply seeped in Jewish values, but in fact it has to be followed with that social justice, social action component, so that this is not the case in the future. How about for you guys?
I want to say a couple of things. First of all, I'm a public health person. So qualitative research and community action are sort of they're part of my fiber, okay? So when I was starting the mental health initiative at Temple Isaiah, I knew that I had to have a core group of really good, dedicated people, and that was going to take time. That isn't something that the rabbi could just say, okay. So we were a ground-up effort, and I want to recognize, I think it's very important, I did not do this. A community did it. And I know that there are members of our mental health initiative who are here, and I would really like them to be recognized. I would really like to say, good job, folks. From the beginning, we built this as a community action project, and that meant things like having house meetings. And at those house meetings, people were sharing ideas. The first event that we held when I came out of the closet and another member of our community came out of the closet, Mike and Kitty have been enormous sources of support and encouragement, not just in our congregation, but throughout the country, and I'm sure the world, but I know about what goes on here. And that makes a difference when people who are celebrities choose to use that visibility and power, and it's priceless. And so if somebody who wasn't a Kitty Dukakis had volunteered to do that piece on 60 Minutes, it wouldn't have had the same impact. And Kitty knows that, and Michael knows that, and all of us know that. So that's like necessary, but what they say is that's necessary, but it's not enough. We all have a responsibility to do that too.
It's so important. And Jamie, as a celebrity to us, but not necessarily to the broader community, although after tonight I think that will change, what could you add?
Simply talking about it, normalizing it, at whether it's in a formal setting or in an informal setting, but in the synagogue or in another community, you are taking steps. Every time that we talk, every time the Dukakises talk, people come up to them, they come up to us, and they tell their stories. And they tell their stories because they have nobody else to talk to. We have a little group, and the little group has a website. We've had people from Mississippi contact us. Why? Because there's nobody else for them to talk to in Mississippi. We have lots of mental health care professionals in this town. We have lots of caring people in healthcare, and yet too many people suffer this in silence, in shame, in guilt. It's not right. And so the best thing you can do in your own way is try and open up, because invariably, if you're sitting one seat over, somebody within 3 or 4 seats on either side of you has been through the same. I'm preaching to the choir, I know. But the thing that we can do is tell our stories to people. Not everybody can listen, not everybody can respond, not everybody knows what to say, but some people will. And for those of you who are going through this in one way or another, you will find help, you will find support, you will find love, you will find courage in the stories of others.
Thank you. And I'd like to ask the rest of our panelists to just add your own thoughts on what is one thing that we all can take away from tonight and actively pursue in our synagogues or in our own communities to close.
Can I say two?
Of course.
Okay. Never will I say one thing. I think to really live out Hillel's notion of if I am not for me, who will be? If I am only for me, what am I? If I'm not for me, help me. Whatever. If not now, when? It's like get up and move, okay? And live it. Don't just preach it. And I have had this dream for many years. I've been talking about this. I want to live to see the day when mental health challenges are treated with the same compassion as cancer is now. And I want to share. And I wasn't going to do this, but I'm going to do it. I am going to say to you that right now I am dealing with breast cancer. And I know that it's a hell of a lot easier to say to somebody, you know, I'm dealing with breast cancer right now, than even now it is to say, I've dealt with depression. There's something wrong with that. And we all have a responsibility to fix that. That's what I would say.
Mrs. Dukakis, one thing that we can take away tonight.
One of the things that we have, both Michael and I have questioned, is why did this happen? And I think so many people who are suffering with first-hand depression want to know why it's happened. They can't answer that question. It happens. And there is nothing to point to, I guess, is what is frustrating for me. I came from a relatively happy childhood. I was a leader when I was a youngster, and was a leader when I was at Pennsylvania State University, and taught dance there, and I just was a part of the community.
Member of the Student Senate.
Yeah, right, I forget that.
She knew what her future was going to be.
Exactly.
Yes.
But, and both Michael and I have encouraged our kids to, number one, be patient with people like me who have gone through this kind of thing, and try to understand. It's hard for kids to see their mothers hurting. And they can talk about that freely today, much more than when they were younger. I'm about to start writing a book about my mother's beginnings, and it's going to be called Aunt Margaret. And Margaret was my mother's real mother, but she was her nurse, called her nursemaid. And she didn't find out until she was 8.5 that Margaret was not just her nanny, her nursemaid, but was her mother. And Margaret never lost contact with any of us in the family. She was the oldest of 8 Jewish children from Hungary and was loved by everybody in her community. And I'm just finding out stories about her that are just so enveloping. And I knew Margaret and always wanted to visit her, and I'm admitting something I probably shouldn't. I wanted to visit her more than I wanted to see my real grandmother. And I think she knew that. I think she knew that my sister and I had very strong feelings of love for her, and till the very end. And for her 3 other children that she had, who were our uncle and our 2 aunts. And it's a story that I'm looking forward to writing, because I want my children and my grandchildren and my nieces and nephews to understand that story and what they come from. My son loves to call me a mutt because I make up of so many different pieces. My dad's people are from Ukrainian, and came here, and my grandfather was a tailor, and a very well-known tailor in Roxbury and Dorchester. And then I have Hungarian. Margaret was Hungarian.
And then Kitty discovered that she had an Irish grandfather. That's a whole other story.
And I think, imagine how proud all of them would be to know that you're here tonight with us to share all of your stories. And Governor Dukakis, fittingly, last word to you.
Just very
takeaways.
briefly, folks, the one thing I've learned from all of this is not to do nothing when you sense that somebody is suffering from depression. And really, while this has been an enormously painful experience for all of us, the fact that we've gone through it, and I hate to use the term comfort factor, but the fact that we're much more comfortable now in discussing it. I mean, I spot a student who isn't getting papers in on time, who's late to class, who isn't finishing those assignments. And the first thing I think about is maybe there's a mental health problem. And 99 times out of 100, that's what it is. In the old days, I'd have just, when I first started teaching, I'd say, well, hey, these are college kids. I mean,
Right.
They don't want to show up in class. They don't want to do their work tough. Not anymore, folks. As soon as I sense that there's a problem there, I'll call them in and have a discussion with them. Hi, I'm concerned. Is there a problem with depression or whatever? Can I be helpful? You have no idea how grateful those kids are. And that's all because of our experience, my experience with Kitty.
That's all because of you, I think.
But my advice to all of you is, if you see that kind of a problem, don't remain quiet. If you don't think you can handle it yourself, reach out to somebody in your congregation, a professional, whatever, and bring that person into it. You may be saving that person's life, folks.
It's an amazing
And you may be the difference between a life of pain and grief and a life of achievement and fulfillment. I really mean it. So
let that be our charge for all of us. Thank you.